A hero is an ordinary person facing extraordinary circumstances, acting with courage, honor, and self-sacrifice. That is the description of many of our police officers who go unnoticed and unsung. They deserve more. Tonight, we say thank you to an officer deserving. He was sworn in almost unceremoniously, void of the usual pomp and pageantry, but nevertheless, he took office with one goal: to stamp out crime and put criminals where they belong. A career in policing which has spanned over 39 years, Commissioner of Police Paul Rolle is finally laying down his arms and announcing his retirement. Tonight, we have a sit-down with the Commissioner, a stroll down memory lane, to say the least, discovering the mindset of a man who made transitioning from a cop who knew the streets well to the top administrative title of the Royal Bahamas Police Force. Our topic tonight, farewell to a commissioner. And of course, our guest is the Commissioner of Police, Paul Rolle. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. We'll see you on the other side of this break.
So the project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
At the conference, more the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
Welcome back. Tonight we are talking with the Commissioner of Police, Paul Rolle, as we say farewell to a commissioner. Commissioner, welcome to On the Record.
Good evening, Jerome, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
We are going to start with your early life and then, of course, have a conversation about your career. You were born in the 60s in Andros. At any point growing up, did you ever aspire to be commissioner, or were you always interested in policing?
Not interested. I mean, I was always interested in being a police, but never thought about commissioner. As a little boy, you know, we had to watch television. My father allowed us to watch Wednesday nights. if for those who can remember, was the movie night on WPIX, and we had back then it was things like Hawaii Five-O, Book Him Dano. And so, you know, we practiced that, and of course we had Barnaby Jones and those police movies, and I would watch them doing the scientific stuff and dusting for fingerprints, and I was always intrigued by how could they dust this and identify someone who was not there. And as a little boy, that's what I wanted to do. And I came into the police force, and the first opportunity I got, I moved into the forensic scenes of crime area, and I did fingerprinting for 15 years. And I came all the way up to the top, certified in all aspects of fingerprints and photography. That's as far as commissioner, no.
What motivated you to remain on the force all these years?
I think I always wanted to be police. At one point, I started doing architectural work as an architect. I did training in that, and I said, no, I didn't want that. I wanted to be a policeman. And I gave that up. At one point, I wanted to resign, and my wife says to me, no, you always want to be a policeman. Stay there and be a police. And I stayed, and I just dismissed everything else and carry on with serving the people.
When you have hundreds of officers on the police force, moving up the ranks, all kinds of things happening, how does one become a commissioner?
Let's say when I left school, I did not have any GCs. That was the time when, if you recall, the teachers had strike in the 1980s. That ran on for like a whole year and some. Now that was my time to graduate and do our exams. And they said, no, we're not going to let you graduate. You have to repeat. I said, I'm not repeating. This is not my fault. You all been here a whole year. And I took the exam for College of the Bahamas, and I passed. And I began to do my training, and I dropped out. But coming in, when I reached the rank of sergeant 9 years later, I started thinking about administration. I realized then that I've already put in several years doing the technical work, and I knew that in order for me to move, I didn't want to just move, I wanted to prepare myself academically. And so I went back to school, and I did it was now BGCSEs, and I did those, and I passed. And I said, and that convinced me that I was no dummy, and I said, I know I could do this thing. And then I began doing my professional qualification, and as I move up the rank. And as I move up, when I reached the rank of superintendent, I felt then that I did not see any opening. I resigned myself to that. But I continued to prepare myself and to see how best I could serve people within the community. And I just did that until later on, as you get into the very senior ranks, and you can't decide that you want to be commissioner. Those things are made independently, outside of your purview. But by the time I reached, I think, at the level of assistant commissioner, the force was going through a transition, and the lot fell on me.
What, outside of commissioner, what would you say are or what can you recall are some of the more memorable times for you, or memorable moments for you on the force?
I recall in 1989, there was, in the 80s, we were having a lot of murders with the butcher.
I remember that.
Okay, people seem to believe that murders just started happening in recent times, but I've been around and I've investigated literally every murder that happened in the Bahamas in the last nearly 40 years.
Wow.
I would have been there. And so we were having a lot of murders, and I was selected to go to England and to train. You have to understand, Jerome, when you get back in the day, that when you got the opportunity to go off to the United Kingdom to study, you were saying something. And I was like, they chose me. And we had this thing that, you got your BTL. In other words, you've been to London. So you had your BTL. And when you got home, you knew you were getting promoted once you were successful. And I think, for me, that you have to understand, not everybody got to go. And I was one of those persons that was chosen to go. Man, I was very grateful. And I think that got me thinking and started.
You spent a portion of your tenure in CID. You spoke about all of the murders that you have covered in, basically all the murders that have happened in the last 40 years. Were you able to accomplish a lot while you were in that role and in that department?
Yeah. Well, I did 33 years in CID. And so all of my academic achievements, I made the sacrifice. Because when I went to college for Bahamas, for example, I applied and my OC at the time sent the application back and he said it was vague. And I'm like, what's vague about that? I would like to go to school and study. But in the police force, there were only about 4 officers then who had any kind of academic degrees. And they were in the lab and in the forensic science laboratory. No other officer in the force had any kind of thing. And I wanted to go to school, and there was no kind of mechanism to encourage officers to improve themselves. But I made the bold move, and I went to school in my own time in the evening. And so from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. every night I went to school, and then carried right on until I took time off and went and did my graduate studies.
You spoke about and you used the word sacrifice.
Yeah.
Do you think people realize how much of a sacrifice it is to you and even to your family when you are a member of the police force?
No. I said unless you come from a police family, you wouldn't know. And Jerome, I made, especially when I took over CID, that was a critical time because there was a period we were having murders like you're taking 1-a-day tablets. And sometimes they were 2 a night, 3 a night. And my children at that time, back in 2014, 2015, when we were at the height of these murders in the country and the telephone would ring in the night. And I had a parade in my house because all the children would get up and when the telephone rang and Daddy, you going out again? And then there were some nights I'll get home 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and an hour later, I'm gone again. The telephone rings, and and I had to go, and my daughter would get up, she would come and lay in the bed, and she would not go to her bed until I reach home. When I get home, and she knows that I'm home, I take her back to her room, put her in her bed, kiss her good night, and I go to my bed. And there were times where, 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm up and heading back to work. You get by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, sometimes you get tired, you need to go and take a break. And I'll go and take a break because I realized what was going on. I said, before tonight, let me go and get some rest. But I had to shuffle that with dealing with children in school. And then in the midst of all of that, when my baby was born, my wife, who was a nice department, transferred her to Eleuthera. They didn't ask me anything. Unlike how we do it today, we allow you to do it, and they just up, and she was gone.
Wow.
So I'm here now with 3 children, 3 schools, and I had to shuffle between St. Augustine's College, Queens College, and what's the primary school named now in the Catholic primary. Mm-hmm. But my daughter killed me for not remembering her school name.
It's obvious.
No, in Palmdale. St. Thomas More.
St. Thomas More, yes.
Right, and so I had to shuffle those, and then I eventually, send them off to her. And I kept my eldest son, and but it was a sacrifice that we had to make. But in spite of it, I did it. One point, my son got sick because she worked the evening shift and I'll go on, and we were working 12 hours in those days, unlike now. And so I was keeping kids, and then you'll have something happen, and murder just had a habit of happening around 9 o'clock. And my wife never got off until 10, and so I have my child in the car with me, and I have to take him to work, and then he ended up with meningitis and in the hospital sick because of the draft. And but he's doing well now. Yeah.
And that's, I guess, for me, how when you make these personal sacrifices, you put in these years in the force, and then you are faced with sometimes the harshest criticisms from the public.
Yeah.
Does that make the job that much harder?
Yes, it does. It does, Jerome. And particularly when I became commissioner, I had to shield my family and shelter them because from the nonsense that was out there, and particularly in social media. We have a lot of malevolent individuals in our society, and that is people who wish harm for whatever reason. And people, I was the subject, as you know, of personal attacks. And you wonder, well, why? You don't even know these people, but people had to protect. And I say my kids because they're my children, but they are not children. All of my children are grown. And my daughter, I refer to her the most because she's she's the last one, and she'll come home and she's a doctor. Okay, she's working in the public hospital. And they say, "What's this thing they're saying about your daddy?" And she say, "Daddy, they're saying this." But I don't think people realize, it's not the individual, but it's the family.
Oh, yes.
It is the family as well. Mm-hmm. And how do you explain to your family, I don't know anything about these things. I don't know why are these people doing this, but you have to do it, and you have to endure. And the same thing with my
job in spite of it.
Oh, yes, you still have to do your job, but I don't know that people realize when they're doing these things, it is just how painful it is. But you have to still be strong. You have to stand in the front of I have a force to run, and it's just not a little department. This is the whole country. Mm-hmm. So where do you go? And I remember in the height of all of this, and I had to go home, and they were having something home for me. And I had to really be strong because, you have your family there, and then, you have some people who believe some of what they hear, and you can't respond to everything.
Yeah.
But you got to have that prayer life, Jerome, and know at home you trust. And I had to rely heavily on my God because that was my strength.
That's a good place for us to take our first break in the show on a very good point. Broad shoulders and also having a strong grounding in your faith and your religion. Sir,
Indeed.
We're going to take a quick break. We're going to have more on the record right after this.
So the project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
At the conference, the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
Our topic tonight is farewell to a commissioner, and of course our guest is the Commissioner of Police, Paul Rolle. Sir, you were sworn in as the commissioner at the onset of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. How did you cope with that on a day that didn't have the usual fanfare, and how did that impact your tenure?
Well, first of all, Jerome, when I was advised that I was going to be appointed commissioner, we were making all of the plans for the handing over ceremony. We had some 2,500 guests that were supposed to come into the garden to witness the ceremony. And Then, just before that, the country went into lockdown. Realized that we had to scrap those plans, and we ended up having a handing over ceremony with 16. My family did not even attend.
Wow.
Only my wife was able to come in, and the kids had to stay home and they watch on television. And so I made the adjustment. I'm very resilient. You know, I realized that plan A is not going to work. As the leader in me realized you could stay there and cry, make a move and cry, or at least you'll survive. I think of the lepers. Okay, in the city of Naim, I believe, they said we could stay out here and die, or we'll go in, and the worst could happen is you die, or maybe you'll find food. But I adjusted, and we move ahead. We did not have any COVID manual. Didn't have any pandemic manual. I didn't draw on my experience then as a sensitive crime officer, and immediately then had to go and write out a protocol for officers as to how we were going to deal with it, and that's what we relied on, and some of that was incorporated, I believe, into the emergency power orders at the time, dealing, because I dealt with noxious matters and those chemicals doing sensitive crime and dealing with dead bodies. So I had that
experience at least.
Yeah.
What would you say were some of the major challenges? This was a brand new experience for everybody, for you, for the country, even for the government, and for the world. What were some of the major challenges that you faced almost immediately?
Almost immediately, remember, there were two things going on, because I was still dealing with Hurricane Dorian. And the commissioner at the time had assigned me to deal with Abaco and the rebuilding of Abaco and the re-establishing our infrastructure, which was all obliterated and destroyed. So I was dealing with officers now relocated who had to move out and getting officers. We were scheduling officers, moving officers from Nassau. I had to send, at one point, with 900 policemen into Abaco. And then right on the heel of that came the pandemic, and if that wasn't bad enough, the commissioner left office. And then it was only me and a couple of officers there, because remember, some of the assistant commissioners were placed on leave.
Right.
And so it was only me and I think Ismella Davis in Nassau, and Sam Butler was in Grand Bahama. So I then had to, apart from all of that, moving those officers back and forth, I then had to try and put officers out in the street. And then in the midst of that, officers were retiring. And we couldn't train, you could not hire. And so within that period, I lost about 500 officers to
Really?
retirement.
Wow.
To retirement. And then we had to deal with the lockdown, and then at first persons were very cooperative, okay, and I mean people in the community, because they understood this is a good thing. But look, even us thought that this would have been over in like 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We didn't know what to expect. When I looked, I saw a month had passed, and we were arresting persons, and I said to the Prime Minister, this is not working, because we're arresting people. I don't think that these offenses should be criminal. These are civil offenses. We need to find a different way. And so I then prepared the document for us to ticket. And they accepted it. And that stopped us, because coupled with that was officers were getting infected, because they had to now physically arrest people and put them in custody.
Pardon the pun, but the force came under a lot of fire during that period for these arrests and even for these charges. I mean, and how do you say to a prime minister, sir, this can't work? We have to change. How do you face into that to say, no, we cannot do this?
Well, I told him when I have a weekly briefing with the prime minister, and I said to him, sir, I think this is not working. I'm not too concerned about the criticism as much as it was the offenses. We were arresting people, and what you find is somebody who is doesn't have a place to live, you arrest him, but when he comes, he's going to go right back there. And then the other concern, like I said, was that officers were getting sick. And when, understand now, it's not like one officer sick. When you have an officer got infected with COVID, that's the whole guard that has to quarantine. So I only have so many officers, and when you done quarantine the whole guard, there's nobody else to wake. And we were finding ourselves, now you got prisoners in the cell, but nobody to wake. So that was not going to wake. And then it was only a few, and those numbers at one point, I think we had about 600 officers in quarantine. So we had to then find a way. Once we started doing the ticket, which is a deterrent, that kind of slowed up, and the Prime Minister accepted the recommendations and allowed us to ticket. As we began ticketing, those numbers went down. Of course, you know, and that, of course, some of the tickets, of course, you know, the amount, I don't know how they arrive at the amount. I just thought that as opposed to arresting, but when you arrest, remember now, a couple of things going on. I had to cook for every officer because we're in lockdown.
So you had to provide meals?
Yes, there's no restaurants open. And I had to cook literally 1,000 meals every day in my kitchen at headquarters.
Wow.
And take it out to the officers and for the prisoners. Because they're my responsibility once they're in your custody. And I'm saying, y'all have to help me with this bill. So when I submit the bill, I think one of the things that helped motivate the Prime Minister when I give him that bill for $500,000. He realized, that next day they had a ticket.
Wow. And then, of course, you are dealing also with the officers who are stationed out in the elements and having to deal with that. That seemed to be a physical strain as well, because they're stationed out there all night.
And officers had to be out in the elements. And I went and purchased some tents. And the first day I put the tents out, we had a storm.
I think I remember that.
And the storm is, people, they were criticizing me, right, for having them out there. I went and I bought the tents, and the storm came and just tore them apart. And I'm like, man, you can't win for losing.
Wow.
And so I rented tents. Okay, I rented tents, and then I think some company had loaned us some tent, and next thing you know, they went out and they took the tents. Didn't say anything to us, and the officers went out, and then they were like, the tents are gone. And they were saying, somebody stole the tents. And then we checked, you know, people said, no, well, we told y'all we'd give you the tent for a week or two, we need our tents. But yeah, that was the challenge. And then I had to let the officers go out in their vehicles. So whatever cars I had, instead of keeping them at the station, we put the cars out there.
You also, during that time, introduced the COVID unit.
Yeah.
I think it was. And again, people did not take kindly to the COVID unit, but if you could sort of tell us, you know, in your mind, was that unit successful? Was it necessary, or could these things have been done by regular police officers?
Well, the COVID unit was regular police officers. What we did was we simply, I took out some of the officers that were on pension, mainly contracted officers, because they were on year to year. And we put them to deal specifically with those breaches, so that would free up the officers as opposed to you calling in every officer having to go and deal with it. And then we had the situation with persons going into quarantine, and we needed, at least if you have one crew get infected, you don't have the whole police force being infected. And so they were the ones that would normally do the monitoring. And then I think the government then had brought in ambassadors. Those COVID ambassadors they did not have any authority. They could not give no ticket. They couldn't do any of that. They were just there to say to people, wear your mask, social distance. That was their duty. And I think it got kind of convoluted because we ended up putting them in cars with the police. So people were saying, the COVID police.
Yes, the COVID, yes.
Yeah. But it was just one, and they were really initially to be in the public places.
Sort of encourage people to follow the rules.
Yes.
All right, sir. We are going to take another break in our show. You are watching On the Record. We'll be back right after this.
project surely pays itself back. They
Correct.
set up
At the conference, the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
You're watching On the Record. Welcome back. Headlines in this week's newspaper, sir, said that crime is up 18%, murder is up by 26%. How do we manage that? And how does the force deal with that when crime is constant?
Yeah.
We would have come out of a period where it was almost non-existent. We were locked down and there was not a lot going on. And then we started to open up and there was an explosion almost.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you manage a situation like that when crime begins to increase so rapidly?
Yeah, when I think starting in probably the late part of last year, we start to see this rise in crime, because if you were following, a couple of things were going on. You also had a rise in drug trafficking, and remember, what I don't think people realize is that when the country was in quarantine and locked down, the drug operators realized that the police have to be dealing with that, so we can now do our trade. And so drugs were moving, and then we started striking, and we were intercepting large shipment of drugs that were destined here for the country. There was a movie says Romeo Must Die.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you intercept a fella, large shipment, $2 million, $3 million, he starts, how did the police know about this? And then there's this almost a process of elimination, and then you have TAFE, people trying to establish TAFE, and as people begin to move about now, there was a lot of drugs floating around, and that was fueling much of the violence. If you look at any of the countries, and all, even in the United States, the same thing was going on. So it started off first with the drug trade, and then we had a proliferation of firearms. The guns were always here, but people needed guns to protect their their drug trade. And as we interdict, then you find that this war started going on, and we had to then step up our efforts to really try and suppress that. It was not an easy road, but people were now free, and as they became free, so were conflicts. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say the other thing we saw too were a lot of face-to-face conflicts. It seemed like people were almost sitting on these grudges or waiting to get out.
And as soon as they got out, we saw a new, almost like you have this pent-up, we talk about the pent-up desire for vacation. People have this pent-up anger and of whatever, and they just exploded and began everything. There seemed to be no middle ground, and everybody just go from 0 to 60.
One of the things that we were able to find out in a discussion here on gang violence, and I'll come back to that, is a lot of these things were even fueled on social media. There were these wars on social media that now were out in the public.
Yes, and there's a lot of that was going on in social media, and these gangbangers have their way of communicating and sending these subliminal messages. They know how to decode it, and then it spills into the public domain. And then you have some gang members who they want, look, this is our club, this is where our boys meet. So you have the drug trade, fella has them selling drugs for him, and at the end of the day, he say, look, meet at the place, and he's treating them, and they're having a party. And the difficulty that we have had in the Bahamas is so you used to be in my gang, and now you break away and you go on, but you know all of my secrets. I don't trust you. So you can't come and show up now back at my club where we're having our party. You guys say, that's Jerome, what are you doing in here? So they ain't gonna trust you, and somebody come out there, they can pick a fight with you, and before the night is over, you have a shootout. Either they kill you or you kill one of them and run, and then you know they come and looking for you. They know everything about you, they know where to find you, they know where you live, they know where your girlfriend lives. So it's only a matter of time, Jerome, before they find you gunned down.
Is there a way, as this is happening, what does the police do? You just wait for someone to be killed? Is there a way to stop this?
If you know, you see, and again, people expect the police to be the all in all. When I was in CID, I had this ability to say who was going to be next to die, because I knew what was going on, and many times I would send the officers. I said, "Look, go find Jerome and bring Jerome here. Let us have a talk with Jerome, because we're doing these investigations and we know what the information is. We know that they're looking for you." And we had actually locked people up to kind of stop them, and then by the time they get out and they go home or they go to their girlfriend, we check, most of them were killed going to their girlfriend or coming from the girlfriend.
People were waiting on them.
The people were just waiting. These are guys who are not working and they have plenty free time.
One of the issues that has erupted as well since we have opened up has been this issue of gang violence, but even among school-age children.
Yeah.
We have discussed it in this forum and elsewhere, but the proliferation and the growth of these gangs and recruitment of high school age kids.
Yeah, that's unfortunate that we have seen that, but it is also true that many of our young men and young girls have been drawn into these gangs. And if you look at some of the persons that we've been charging recently, these are youngsters who, for whatever reason, I know we've been out of school for a while, and so people had a lot of free time. You listen to the Ministry of Education, some of those kids have never even logged on to the portal. So what were they doing? My mommy always used to say, idle hand is the devil's workshop. And so they had plenty of idle time, and the persons who wanted to get this gang, and they were recruiting them young and allowing them to commit these crimes, because they're telling them, you're not going to go to jail, they ain't going to do you nothing. And some of these youngsters, you give a young fella a gun, he feels invincible. He said, go shoot him. And he goes and he shoots. He worries about that after. Now when he realized that mommy can't help him, daddy can't help him, he's locked up, and the fellow who sent him, he can't be found. So you lose one in death, one in prison. And then you got several families now that are hurting, because it's not only the family that lost a loved one, but it's the family whose son now or daughter must go to jail for killing that one. And so if you imagine the amount of pain and the amount of anger, then you have the other thing now coupled with people not being able to get justice. So what you've seen happening a lot recently too, we talk about this retaliation, because people have all but lost faith in the criminal justice system, because the system is just too slow. We have to find a way to speed up these trials that when persons are charged with these serious offenses. Jerome, I left over 2,400 cases in the Supreme Court in my years at CID. I saw Minister Mitchell on his note this morning says the murders in Fox Hill that happened in 2012, the 4 persons on the park. 10 years later, is it? And still no trial. I investigated that. I'll be long gone, probably 80. I'll be about 80, and still my cases will be in the courts.
Do you think this is contributing to the problem, because people feel as if, one, there is no justice, and as the fellows will tell you, I could take a couple of years for a crime and be back out?
Well, as a criminologist, one of the things that I learned why people commit crime is that, one, they will not be caught, And two, if caught, they will not be punished. Now,
Do you think that's a feeling here?
I don't know if that's it might be, because as you said, the fellow saying that he could go and do, well, they're not going to court and going to jail. You got to go to jail first to be able to do your couple of years and come back out. But check the court, that's public record. How many matters we have, persons charged with serious offense, not only murder, but how many cases that you get disposed of in a year? We have 10 courts. Each Supreme Court, I believe, sits for about 9 months. And if one court takes a month to hear a case, really each judge is only doing about 8 to 9 cases per year, 10 if you're lucky. But then every week and every day you're charging people and putting them before the court, so that number is adding on. So it's diminishing returns. Because you're adding more, but you ain't going nowhere.
Is that discouraging for your officers?
I don't let it discourage me. I think it is something that those in authority need to look at and try to fix, because that ain't my arena. My arena is to try to keep the Bahamian people safe. And I'm doing that, and I'm putting them before the court. But you see the same person sometime, twice, 3 times, and then you find I arrested daddy, now I'm arresting the son. And the daddy ain't get justice yet. Or the daddy went to jail for a long period of time. But holistically, these are some things that we have to look at. I have been into the United States and looked at their system, and the majority of their cases dealt with through plea deals. We had one plea deal here the other day, and that caused a whole furor in the country because the prosecutor agreed, well, it's either we're going to agree to the plea deal or agree for these persons to commit the crime and after a few years go free without being held accountable. And so we put these stiff penalties in, and as a deterrent, I don't know how much of a deterrent. I've not done any research in that regards to see how much it is. I would like, though, to see an improvement in the, and I know that I'm aware that the Chief Justice has been, he and I have been talking, and he is concerned about it. The Director of Public Prosecutions, the Acting Director Williams now, he and I have spoken, and he's also concerned, and they're trying to do some things. I'm making my general observation as to what the situation is. That could lead, but then you'll have to look and see how many of those. We know the recidivism rate is very high. That's another discussion for another day, what is happening at the prison.
We're dealing with these serious crimes, murders, attempted murders, all these serious crimes and serious criminal matters, but you're also having to deal with other crimes as well. We call them the white-collar crimes, the financial crimes, crimes involving even public figures. Is there a pressure to deal with these crimes differently? And when I say pressure, I'm going to speak to political pressure sometimes, to handle these cases differently?
I don't know. Well, in my time as commissioner, no. We dealt with these all the same. When you're dealing with so far I believe we've only had one under this new administration. And the former administration, I was responsible for conducting investigations at the anti-corruption branch. And I would receive the requests from the Attorney General pertaining to matters. We conduct those investigations in my time. There were once or twice he felt we were not moving fast enough. I would not allow them to dictate to me. I just simply did because I wanted to be fair, and I was not going to be caught up in this whatever was going on. The lot fell on me to have to do it. I didn't want to do it, but it just so happened that the lot fell on me, and we did what we had to do. And I think those who we dealt with, I dealt with many of them. People don't know, but they were dealt with respectfully, and nobody even know that we were dealing with it. Unlike today, I'm saying you hear people say, well, this one is being called in, did they call for, I never got involved with that. I dealt with those persons respectfully, nobody knew, and I've been saying to members of the press as well, we have to respect the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. Just because somebody called your name doesn't make you guilty. And I've found in doing them, particularly in my time, I didn't find no guilt in none. But, you would have heard a lot of things, and it gave the impression that people do things. And that's why sometimes it's better to have an investigation, and you get exonerated.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to take our final break in the show. We have a few more questions for the Commissioner. Stay with us. You are watching On the Record. We are back right after this.
So the project really pays itself back. They
Correct.
set up
At the conference, the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
All right, welcome back. You're watching On the Record. My guest for this show is the now outgoing Commissioner of Police. Sir, let's talk about life after policing. It's just been announced that you're going to take on a diplomatic role as an ambassador. Are you looking forward to that? What will that entail for you?
Jerome, I'm looking forward to that. That's at the International Maritime Organization. I've been dealing with the maritime issues from 2008 when I was an inspector.
Wow.
And came up, I did my initial training at the PML Maritime Academy in Scotland, and where I got my initial certification and port security. And then I did my training at the Carnival Naval Academy in Miami, and where I was certified as ship security, and then later on did the advanced training in company security in Barbados. I've been working with the Bahamas Maritime Authority from then, 2008, and assisting them with matters, and I've since gone through about 3 or 4 different directors.
What will your role entail? If you could help us to understand, what will you
I'll
be doing in that role?
As the ambassador sitting at the, the Bahamas was elected to the consul, and the consul is the executive arm of the IMO, and I'll be representing it because the Bahamas, Jerome, is ranked in the 3rd top 3 in ship registry in the world, and so we have a voice, but have no representation. And so this now will be able to establish a presence at the IMO where we'll be making policies and affecting policies for the safety and security of ships on the Bahamian Register, and not only the Bahamian Register, but ships generally, because that is they're dealing with all of the organizations. We're not the only country that does ship registry. We have United Kingdom, we have United States, we have Panama, the Cook Islands, and several of those other islands. They will all have representation there, but we'll be making those policies for the whole maritime sector.
Quite an important job. You will be based here or in
London.
In London. So, okay, back to London.
Yes.
BTL, been to London.
Yeah. This one now will be back to London.
Back to London, there you go.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about your tenure as commissioner. What would you say will be one of the more memorable moments for you as commissioner?
I think there are quite a bit because I've done, Jerome, in my short period of time, I've done quite a bit, and I think having to drive technology in the police force, enhancing what was already in place, and I was privileged to kind of oversee the introduction of the now real-time crime center, where countries around the world now are looking to us. I've been to Dubai, and they've been following us, watching when we did our launch. But Dubai got money, and since looking at us when we opened up, I think last year or year before, they went and they invested millions and did their real-time crime center, which is elaborate. And they invited us to come over and look at it. And I'm like, you got this idea for me, but look at what they did, right?
Of course, they've taken it and expanded it.
Oh, yeah. And then, of course, they have a lot to offer. And then, of course, in that, we have the expansion of the CCTV and me bringing in the body-worn cameras, dash cameras, which was never used in the Bahamas before. I kind of oversaw that. We had the shot spotter technology, and now we have the drone technology that is working out those kinks with that. And then I think for me, that aspect of it, and then we've done a whole lot of other stuff as well to try to, in a short period of time, yeah.
And I have to commend you because, we found ourselves as a world forced into using technology,
Yeah.
and I have to credit the force. You never skipped a beat for us during COVID. I mean, the press conferences were virtual. We were able to get information, and it happened. You kept kept the work of the force going, even for us on the media side. So I do have to commend you for that. Now on the flip side, what would you say, or how would you categorize your worst experience as commissioner?
My
worst experience as commissioner?
I think my worst experience as commissioner was when I was verbally attacked last year and accused of committing some breaches. I think that was the lowest point in my life.
Why?
Because to hear these allegations, and I'm like, really? It's not only me. What are you saying about these young women in the Royal Bahamas Police Force? I thought it was just shameful and disgraceful that person would be allowed to make those type of comments. And then not only that, but to make them pertaining to the commissioner, sitting commissioner, and with baseless. I thought that was low. And for me, I had to deal with that. And I don't know that there was another time in my life where there were accusations, persons leveled stuff about me, and I think much of it because of the work that I was doing. And but people took to social media and they had their say. They had their say and cut me up good and seasoned me with pepper and lime, and then I guess had their buffet. But by the grace of God, Jerome, I am here today.
Exactly, and I think it was Harper Lee who said in his book one time that truth is the best vindication to slander. So leave it there. What advice would you give for the incoming commissioner, person who is going to take this seat now once you retire? What advice do you give to him or her?
You'd have a broad shoulder. You have to look out for the interests of those officers that serve you. and you have to protect your family. You have to insulate your family because as a public figure, and I think we have taken this thing to public figure to a new level, where when you reach into these positions, there are those who have an assignment to distract, and you have to stay focused. You have to find ways to stay focused. You must have a prayer life. You must have your God that you communicate with and who communicate with you and tell you things and share things with you, because it is not easy sitting as commissioner. That is a lonely position to be in. You work long hours. You have to be dedicated to this. I leave home every morning, 6 o'clock, 6:30, I'm in my office, and I leave there 7 at night, and still you don't feel like it is sufficient time. You have to learn how to deal with the ingratitude that you see come from people, because sometimes they just don't understand. But it is a labor of love and a sacrifice that you do despite the noise. Mind you, those that are making the noise are few in numbers. But somebody once said, empty vessel make the most noise. And I say fewer vessels also could make more noise because they are more with you than those that are against you. But that's that those that are against you speak the loudest.
So, Commissioner, I think that's a good place for us to end. I want to, first of all, congratulate you on your tenure.
Yes.
I want to thank you for some accommodations that you made for me. Many times I wrote and called and WhatsApp and Commissioner, can we get, and you made some accommodations, and I appreciate that. And I thank you for the accommodations that you made even to the media as a whole. I can speak for the group. We appreciate you, and best of luck. You know, in your new position and your new post. Enjoy London. It's one of my favorite cities.
Yeah, me too. This would actually be my third stint there. I went there in '89. Went back in 2004. Actually, 2008. Now this would be my fourth.
Well, best of luck to you and enjoy.
Certainly.
All
Thanks,
right,
Jerome.
sir. That's going to do it for our topic tonight. Farewell to the Commissioner. And of course, our guest was none other than the Commissioner of Police, Paul Rolle. Join us again next week with another topic that directly affects the lives of Bahamians. Until then, I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
All right.